I note from my very deep research into Unilever, looking at Wikipedia this morning, that it's the world's third largest consumer goods company, and it's the world's largest maker of ice cream. And you can't do more for the public good than that. Now, the theme of this conference is Capitalism 2.0, and we're very fortunate to have the CEO of one of the world's biggest companies to talk about that. And I wanted to start off by asking you, Paul, what is it that you're doing at Unilever that brings you here today and that leads you to want to talk about Capitalism 2.0?
Oh, thanks, Adrian. Can you hear it? Yeah, it's a little better. Thanks, Adrian. The ice cream business is the fun part because I always say we're in the business of providing smiles, which is a very good business to be in. If we can get the world to smile in today's times, that's already an achievement by itself. First, I want to thank Deepa. I haven't even had proper time to give her the Dutch kisses on the cheek because I'm really here thanks to her father. CK was an enormous man and used to work with Unilever. Being Indian native himself, used to be on our HUL board, brought the concept of the bottom of the pyramid obviously well into the company before he wrote the book, and was just a great man, and we're grateful for what he has done for the company and where we are today. So I owe more to him for being here than anything else. Our business model is a very simple one, and why I guess you wanted me to be here. It's very clear, and you can see that with the discussions that the previous panel had about capitalism, that obviously the system is being challenged, more so since 2008 with the financial crisis, which probably was more a moral or ethical crisis. A lot of people have started to ask themselves questions of what we were doing. Is that really sustainable? And I always like to quote Winston Churchill here, that who said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other ones that were invented. It's the same with capitalism. It's enormous what capitalism has brought to this world in terms of wealth creation, technology, science, if you want to, health benefits, and etc. In fact, I wouldn't be sitting here probably myself were it not for the forces of capitalism that gave us all a chance. Enormous amounts of people lifted out of poverty. But it's also very clear that there are some stresses in the system. A system that relies on growth with enormous amounts of debt. The chart that Bernard put up is actually striking. How much money goes around doesn't do anything. Where we overuse resources. WWF estimates that we're already currently using 1.5 times the resources that the world has. And where in fact too many people are still left behind. If you look at it, Vicky was talking about 3 billion people living for less than $2 a day. So a system that has brought us very far, but is also showing tremendous stresses and shortcomings. And that's at the roots of Occupy Wall Street or the Arab Spring or other things. It's very clear, and this is where capitalism comes in or not. You can have your definition, I'll give you mine in a second. But any system where too many people for too long feel that they're not participating or getting the benefits, or where they feel they're excluded, these people will ultimately rebel against the system. And business needs to understand that. So we are just simply saying business needs to be part of that solution to find a world that is more sustainable and equitable for everybody, and become an actor, a proactive actor in finding the solutions, not just a bystander. Too many businesses feel that they can benefit from a system without participating in that system. That's just not healthy anymore, and it will be rejected. Now, there are some forces at work which are more pertinent now than they've ever been, for which reason businesses need to adjust their business model. The first one, as you heard from the panel again, is the digitization of society. Facebook is now the third biggest country after China and India, with over 1 billion people. We have 2.5 billion people connected now. Soon we will have 50 billion connected devices, 1.5 billion people on social networks. And these people are organizing themselves increasingly more. I was the other day with Jeremy Gilley, who organizes Peace One Day. He reckons he has now over 2 billion people participating. Earth Day, started by WWF, has the same numbers. So consumers are demanding that change and will demand transparency and contributions of companies. Otherwise, they'll isolate companies. And then the second thing that is happening is because of the rapid shift that you've seen to the east, or to the south for that matter, and the rapid changing economic balances, we've exposed our political system. We've exposed our institutional system in a way that isn't pretty. This year alone, 65% to 70% of the world's GDP is in election, and you've seen politicians becoming increasingly short-term, having a hard time to internalize to their electorate these global challenges that we're talking about. And increasingly, the role of business should be there to step up and fill some of these voids. We've seen lacks of Doha round agreements, climate change agreements, many other ones. Rio was a watered down statement that you wouldn't believe. So we have a duty here to be sure, I think, that we stay on course and address some of these issues when a political system is becoming less able to do so, and when, in fact, consumers demand it even more so. So what we decided in Unilever was to very simply change one word, but it is more than one word. Instead of operating like most businesses do on how can I use society and the environment to be successful, we just simply said, how can we give to society and an environment to be successful? It's simply too late to have a CSR type model. You really need to have a model where you actually contribute to solving these issues, where you actually reduce the resources, where you bring the effects of climate change down. We're well above the 2-degree challenge, where you ensure that there is a more equitable growth. And if you do that, you find better business opportunities and actually grow faster, consumer will embrace you, you'll be very successful. In Unilever, we called it the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. We set a goal to double our turnover. There's nothing wrong with that. 2 billion more people coming into this world, many improving their standards of living. We want to participate in that. But to total decouple our growth from our environmental impact, take a responsibility across the total value chain, and make that sustainable and equitable growth. We put 50 targets behind that. Some of the bigger targets would be total sourcing of our agriculturally based materials sustainably, providing 500,000 more jobs to smallhold farmers, a total decoupling our model, and reaching 1 billion people improving their health and well-being, which for us is a target that might sound audacious, which it is, but we have about 2 to 2.5 billion consumers a day that use our products with the scale that we have. So why not use that as a force for good? We've been at it for 3 years. Obviously, we had to change the framework in which we do business. That's why, indeed, I abolished the guidance, I abolished quarterly reporting, I changed compensation systems for the long term, just to get a little bit of a behavior driver around that. But also then, obviously, we've been working hard to drive this business model into Unilever. And more importantly, into our group of stakeholders, because we realize more than anybody else that the challenges that we have to address and the issues that are being expected from us to be solved are of such magnitude that we simply can't do it alone. So I'm a little bit with interest listening to what is the social entrepreneur or not, or what is responsible capitalism, whatever word you want to put out on that. I think we're all in the same boat. I'm as much of an NGO as many other NGOs. At least I know for sure I'm not a government. And you know, this whole concept of profit is a funny thing as well. Which brings me to the last thing, and then we'll go into the Q&As, which is capitalism and all the discussions about capitalism. Bernard said it well, in my opinion. We've just become too narrowly focused on, if you say that the role of a capitalist is to optimize their return on its capital, we've just become too narrowly focused on the financial capital alone. And we've increasingly started to ignore the social capital and the natural capital. And if we just make clear to capitalists that you need to optimize all 3 forms of capital and let them loose on that, there are no better people who know how to handle that and optimize that. If they don't understand that and don't do that, they will increasingly, again, once more, starve themselves from opportunities to grow. Business simply cannot succeed in many of these societies or parts of society that don't function. So that's really why we're here. That's what we're trying to do with a model like ours. But we're not particularly proud of that, to be honest. We just think it's the only way that we can see is responsible. And if we would be the only ones doing it, to be honest, I'm not so happy about that either, because we would not have that impact that actually is needed in society. So we spend a disproportionate amount of time ensuring that we form coalitions to get others to do the same thing. And if we create that critical mass, that force for change, I think we'll have a chance for a better world for now and generations to come, which is what this is all about.
Now, you've given a very much a businessman's and a business strategist's answer to the question. But what does all of this mean to you personally? Can you give us a few personal sense of why you're involved in this?
Well, what it means to me personally is I have 3 children myself, so without being too emotional, we could probably conclude we've had it very easy in our generation. I was born in '56, but when I was born, I thought it was an enormous time after the Second World War. Now, the older I get, I think it was pretty close after the Second World War. But when our parents, you know, my father never went to university because that was during the war. Didn't have a chance. I don't know if he ever would have, but his main goal was to be sure that his 6 siblings would go to university. So the man works 2 jobs, day and night, works for his community, constructs something. They were indeed proponents of a strong Europe and having a peace because they went through things that they didn't wish upon anybody else. But they worked for the greater good. And then we came along, and frankly, we've had an awfully easy time in life to do well and create a level of comfort that is beyond anybody's expectations, to be honest. I was talking the other day with Aung San Suu Kyi. We were hosting a dinner for her, and I asked her, after having been so many years under house arrest, what was her biggest shock when she came back into the real world, so to speak. And she said that we just don't realize how much comfort we've created around us and take that for granted versus what she was used to. And so our generation has become a me generation, and we've created quite some problems, to be honest. And I have 3 children, as I said, so how can I come home and say, you know, well, we've stolen from you the resources that actually belong to you. We've taken all the opportunities away that you don't have anymore. Take youth unemployment in Europe is going to be a big issue, and many other places. And we've made it a mess, so go out and fix it. That is probably a very unsatisfying answer. Instead, I think us that belong to the small percentage in the world that can at least make a contribution, that have that possibility to do it, you should at least owe it to yourself to say, you know, we tried to correct things that needed to be corrected. We tried to put this world on a path of sustainable and equitable growth to all. And we made it a little better so that you have the same opportunities that we have. And if you don't try that, I think you're missing a part of the reason why we're here, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the penalties I pay for being a business journalist is I get sent large numbers of books on corporate social responsibility.
I'm sure there are many of them.
Which consist of a series of nice words in varying orders.
I heard they were writing the 50 Shades of Capitalism soon.
And yet I just saw in the British news that some very prominent companies, many of which have boasted about their corporate social responsibility, have managed to pay 0 tax. I see in the news this morning that a large oil company, which made a great name for itself as a leader in the corporate social responsibility movement, has been fined a very significant amount of money for an oil spill that it was involved in. I won't mention the name of the company. Isn't there a lot of greenwashing involved in corporate social responsibility? Aren't there a lot of companies that are really in the business of maximizing profits, just putting a good face on things?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you at all. That's absolutely true. And I think anybody who's tried to... there's a lot of confusion out there. I don't know if it's all greenwashing or if it's, you know, not living up to the total expectation that is needed now. I think there are many companies that are trying to do the right thing. Many CEOs are looking at carbon in any of their companies or participating in global efforts at a CSR level. Many of these companies that you mentioned are trying to have a positive impact with their products or with the way they do in society as well. But what we are saying is you really need to go a step further now to be part of solving some of these challenges that are well laid out, for example, in the Millennium Development Goals. So I don't want to use the word greenwashing and all that doesn't solve anything. I think because it will alienate and split society even more than it is now. More than ever, we need to embrace everybody in a new business model to try to solve some of these challenges. So specifically to the issues of paying tax, not paying tax, fortunately you didn't ask that because we happen to be a UK-located company and a Dutch-located company, so we've always been very happy with that, and we don't move around our headquarters. We just focus on the consumer and bringing the right things to the consumer, and if we do that well, then fine. But you know, it is quite normal, if I may be honest, for companies and anybody to look at optimizing their cost structures to be sure that they have a sustainable business model. And tax is being seen by many as a cost structure. And as long as that happens within the frameworks that are put together, which are different for different governments to decide. Personally, I think, if you want my opinion on that, which probably gets us diverted from this panel, that competition around tax is a healthy competition to ensure that governments don't get too bloated. I think one of the things that we've seen here is a transfer of money that has resulted in a very inefficiency at the governmental level. So to have some competitiveness there, I think makes these economies a little bit more robust long term to the benefit of all of us. That's why I personally have never been for a European tax rate. But I talk here personally, obviously. But it is true that a lot of these companies have to be, have to make this jump. And that is difficult nowadays because the economy isn't easy. The average tenure of a CEO is 3 years or less. The moment you stick out your neck and you want to do something more than serve your shareholders, you have the press picking up at you, people like yourself writing funny articles. And a lot of people, think it's not...
I hope you mean by funny, amusing, not strange.
Amusing, it's my English. But so a lot of people say, is it worth all of that? And what we're trying to do is to galvanize these fan cards, these leaders, with a big enough group to drive that change. And it starts with one person at a time.
Now, one of the arguments at the heart of CSR, or shared value, whatever you want to call it, is this notion of win-win, that both society and companies can do well. Well, there's a certain amount of truth in that, but what do you do when you have a real conflict between the company and social purposes? How do you make the trade-off? What sort of calculation do you use to make a difficult trade-off?
I'm not so sure that there are conflicts actually between the company and social purposes, other than that the company might say my remit or my expertise is not really to help contribute to solve that social purpose, because we all have to stay within our expertise levels. The challenges are more in terms of priorities. The challenges are in paybacks and investments sometimes. The challenges are in capabilities. But we frankly around our business model haven't come around challenges that have thrown me off balance in terms of the different constituents I need to serve. And I don't think it needs to either. If you really think this through and make it an integral part of your company business model and your strategy, you can handle that. Obviously, there are short-term investments that have to be made, but that is the same with anything. If I put a factory down, I have to first put the money in before I get the return on the production of that factory. And that is the same with some of the investments that we are making here. I've also always said, although we don't report on a quarterly basis, we only report twice a year. It doesn't mean we don't need to perform on a continuous basis either. Companies like ours, or any, can think about sequencing all of their contributions to make their business models more robust in a way without compromise. And we're producing that. Our share price has doubled, our turnover has grown 25%. In a very difficult environment. We're one of the fastest growing companies now. And I think that is the case because our business model is increasingly more accepted by what society needs.
Why did you make this decision to report twice a year rather than quarterly?
Because we don't make decisions on 90 days. If you do 90 days and you exclude the weekends, you're only talking about 76 days.
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to talk to these analysts and talk about Ramadan was a week earlier, Christmas changed, the weather was bad for my ice cream. I have more important things to do in life. So it is totally useless conversation, if to be honest, and increasingly people understand that, but you're in this trap that you can't get out. So I was very fortunate when I came in as CEO in January 2009 from the outside. I started right in January at the height of that crisis, but I decided the first day to abolish guidance and to move out of this quarterly reporting. And frankly, the only reason I could do that or did that was because I thought the first day they hire me, they're not going to fire me. But, so far that theory has proven to be right. But the share price went down 8% that day, you can look it up. Because the market again thought, oh, then there must be bad news coming. It's the normal trick of a CEO. Make the base low, so you maximize your stock options, whatever it is. And there was a lot of mistrust. So you work that out of the system. As Stephen Covey says, you cannot talk yourself out of things you've behaved yourself in anyway. So I figured if we just long-term deliver, then we overcome the skeptics. Now, I also discovered by being critical about some shareholders or not in our business model, naively I discovered that it was easier to get rid of shareholders than to attract shareholders. But that's okay. If you do long-term the right thing, they will come to you anyway again. And fortunately, there are enough good people in this world who want to put their money in places where they think it's a long-term return and where they feel it's in companies that make a contribution. And a lot of CEOs need to understand that as well. There are too many CEOs spend a disproportionate amount of time to dance to the pipes of their current shareholders and listening to their current shareholders, which is a ridiculous notion in itself. There are so many different shareholders with different opinions, and many of them, unfortunately, are still very interested in optimizing their short-term return, which we know how to do. I can make a statement in the cameras right now about Unilever and move the share price up 5% if I want to. So this short-termism is obviously a drug that is destroying the fabric of society. So we spend a disproportionate amount of time on attracting now the shareholders that have a longer term. Our conversations have become more mature about what the business is about. In fact, our share price is less volatile. Cost of capital is going down. There are enough studies on that that would suggest that it's a good thing actually for your business model as well. So I don't see anything on it other than have the courage to do it. Why it is a bad thing? We're working now with Barnier in Brussels, the Commissioner for the Internal Market, to make the European legislation a little bit more amenable around this. I was last week with Al Gore, and we're trying to create a movement with a big enough group of people to create confidence for others to follow in the same footsteps as what we've been doing. In your country, you've seen the John Kay report, which unfortunately came out the same day as you won 3 gold medals, and that seemed to be more important. But there's a lot of validity in that report that we should pick up on. And I was talking to John the other day on how companies like ours can help get that a little bit more validity. Now we need the banking industry, we need the financial industry, and here again you have a problem because obviously the turnover in that industry is even higher. Anybody who's becoming CEO doesn't know what's in the cabinets there, how many skeletons there still are, and it's very difficult to get now a leader in the banking environment to step up. So we started to create this banking environment initiative with John Farley, was kind enough to lead it as a retired banker, and to see if they can also galvanize themselves around these efforts to get a little bit of different reporting. We'll see again this year what their bonus season does and some other behaviors, because they also are in dear need to build some trust. So perhaps become part of these coalitions to change these environments is really what I'm talking about, so that people can start to behave the right way and get the right incentive system.
Thank you. I'm now going to open this up to questions from the audience. We're going to talk for about another 10 minutes going into the break time. Quick questions if possible, no speeches, and can you identify them yourselves before you speak? The lady there.
Thank you. My name is Bernadette Conrads. I'm former Director General of the European Foundation for Management Development, more recently Director of the Common Purpose, a non-profit organization, and now my own entrepreneur. Question to you. I wanted to shift the perspective to the political domain, because we've been talking a lot about capitalism, but capitalism is an economic system which lives in democracies here and not the other way around. And my question to you would be, we see EU politicians battle about tweaking rules to stay with what we discussed yesterday, and we see Obama, who's got a new chance. Where is your view on the challenges that politicians have to shape the conditions for what this capitalism 2.0 could be in the future?
Yeah. You know, we're at a very good time, to be honest, because if you came from Rio plus 20, there were about 1,800 businesses there, and if you look at the declaration, it also talked about partnership. I've now agreed, based on the request of the Secretary General, to be on the post-2015 development goals for the new development goals when the Millennium Development Goals stop. And the reason I did that also was, again, is a very strong push from the governments to have business involved as well, because everybody understands it's about growth, job creation, more important than ever, but everybody also understands it has to be done in a more sustainable way. And frankly, 9 out of 10 people in the world are in business one way or another. So governments understand that need for partnership, and more coalitions are formed to do that. Now, we as businesses also, it doesn't serve anything to be critical about on politicians, because unfortunately our political system hasn't evolved, whilst the financial system, the technologies, etc., has made the world very interdependent. You know, 20–30% of the CO2 that falls on California comes from China type thing. So you know, we are one world, if we like it or not, in many ways. And we need to help politicians to be able to move things forward versus being too critical about them and expecting them to solve it by themselves. It doesn't happen. Now, the good thing was you mentioned Obama. As soon as Obama won his second term, I don't know if you listened to his acceptance speech, but for example, you saw Major Bloomberg coming out because of Hurricane Sandy, that there was something of climate change, which was a communist word in the US before the elections. We were trying to get meetings with the government on deforestation and some other things we were working. It was very difficult to get through to the administration because it wasn't a cool target. Now that Sandy came, all of a sudden Bloomberg, immediately Obama and their acceptance. So there is a window that is being opened that business needs to understand and move in. So perhaps we can get some agreements now. I was talking to Christiana from the UNFCCC now. Perhaps we can get some agreements with business on some frameworks around carbon emission, because business likes that security. We might disagree on what these frameworks are, but we prefer frameworks versus no frameworks. And so now you need to step up on the plate, think about that, and enroll governments of the willing. The Dutch have put a carbon tax in. The UK is asking for carbon reporting. The CONI in Europe is asking about it. Now you need some courageous businesses. Now, in business, it's obviously not one word. There are many that will always oppose any change, because there will be winners and losers in any of this. But if we can create a big enough coalition, we need to galvanize. So it's a great time to work with politicians, in my opinion, because they understand the need to work with business, and they're desperately looking for things that they can influence and change, but it's beyond their country, so they understand they can't do it alone. Denmark has taken a very courageous step to establish the Green Growth Initiative with Korea. Now China has joined. So we get a coalition of the willing, if I may quote a former US president, but this one is a positive coalition of the willing in terms of trying to get enough critical mass. Illegal deforestation. We got the consumer goods industry, the biggest retailers and the manufacturers. They're 3 trillion in retail sales. The Walmarts, the Carrefours, the Metros, but the Nestlés, the P&Gs, the Unilevers. We got them all together to call for a moratorium on illegal deforestation by 2020. Illegal deforestation is about 20% of global warming by itself. It's obviously driven by the enormous urge for food, soy, palm oil, beef, all the things you know, pulp. And there are some countries like Brazil or Indonesia or Malaysia that are most affected by it. That sent an enormous signal into the supply chain. Denmark came with $1 billion. We were talking with SBY, the president of Indonesia. He called for a 2-year moratorium on illegal deforestation. We're losing the size of France every year still right now. And you see more governments coming on this because they see that momentum building. And as we create critical mass, we can galvanize that change. And I think that is more the way the world is going in the next 10 years, in my opinion, than getting an agreement by having 195 countries sit around the table. The reality is America is shrinking back to its own territory, if we like it or not. They've played an enormous role, but they're not willing to do that anymore. And China and India are simply not willing to step up to the world plate yet. They need a certain level of maturity, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality, and we might as well recognize it. So then we should galvanize, and that is where business comes in. I always say, I like to quote Viktor Frankl, actually, who was an Austrian and a Nazi camp survivor, who wrote the book Men in Search for Meaning. And in that book he said, when they built the Statue of Liberty on the east coast of the United States, they forgot to build the Statue of Responsibility on the west coast. And it's absolutely true. And so with the size that we have and the liberty that we have to be everywhere as companies like ours, we also have that responsibility to put some of these things, pull them forward and create these coalitions. It's a very exciting time, also a very exciting time for CEOs, by the way, to be part of that. And it comes back to what the panel before was saying. At the end of the day, it's far more than about making money. It's really a purpose of having a little bit of a fuller life. And I think more and more CEOs will be judged not by how much money they made, but what contribution to society they made.
Paul, question to you, specifically geared towards the education system today. We've heard from some very interesting people, Coder Dojo is one example, going after a scarce skill for populating the future with that skill. We've seen students talk about their business schools and think they're ineffective in their teaching practices that we hear today and yesterday are breaking in terms of concepts. Do you have any thoughts or guidance in terms of things that might be missing in today's education system, either on a personal basis where you see with your children or on a professional basis where you see it with the company Unilever? or any of your past experiences as well?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. But let me just take one step before your education. The biggest issue that we're going to face in Europe, I believe, which worries me the most, is not sustainable growth, not solving the euro, or not the slow economic growth, but there is a rift happening in society between the youth and the rest, and that social cohesion is enormous. Is enormously being challenged. If you have youth unemployment in Spain or in Greece or rapidly coming north of 40–50%. I lived at one point in time in my career in Newcastle where there was no shipbuilding or steel or coal anymore. And for the first time in my life, I actually saw second generation unemployment. People had never seen their parents work. All they could get was a baby when they were 12 years old, because that was a procession to be proud of. Obviously digging themselves into a deeper hole. And it really galvanized my attention to do a little bit more than just having a brilliant career and making a lot of money. And I got involved in the Prince's Trust and other things with Julia Cleverton at that time and all. And I really felt better about my life after that. But it really bothers me again, because this youth unemployment, what are these people going to think about us, about society, about democracy? And that challenge is enormous. So we need to find ways also in business. In the UK, the pension system was actually introduced by Lord Lever, believe it or not. He pushed that through Parliament. He firmly believed in actually a 6-hour workday and pension for his people. He bought Port Sunlight for the housing. The man was a social entrepreneur without anything else. In fact, he made his money on soap because he wanted to eradicate cholera in Victorian Britain. 1 out of 2 babies didn't make it past year 1. He happened to make a lot of money with that, but he always, unlike Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, actually, or the Carnegies or the Rockefellers, he always spent his money before he had it. It's interesting. But having said that, the issues of social cohesion are going to be the biggest issues. So for youth unemployment in the UK, I changed our pension system, and for the first time in history, I got strikes in Unilever, which hurt. It's never nice. It was probably a difficult thing, even personally as well. And the unions went all after us. This is how can you have a Unilever sustainable living plan and try to be this wonderful company, and you're stealing from your workers? YouTube videos, people at my house, letters, threats, all the things you can imagine. And then I said, why don't we take all that money? Because why do we need to retire on final benefit schemes of 75% of your last earned salary when you've paid for your house, your children and everything? You probably amassed a fortune anyway. Why don't we spend all that money and invest it in the youth? And that changed the debate, because it was very difficult for the unions also to not see that. But so create different models to include the youth. The business needs to do that as well. Germany is in a relatively good position, so is Sweden and so is Canada. All these countries went through an economic crisis. The reason they are now strong is because they all found a pact between business and society to make it a more balanced growth and invest. That's why Germany got, for example, these apprentices schemes. So the UK now, for the first time, fortunately, there are 1 million people that are unemployed. Youth is actually going down. And one of the reasons it's going down, as you read the papers, is because of the apprentices schemes. We're taking in enormous amounts of people to do that. If we don't, that social cohesion is going to be the biggest risk. So education is also a responsibility of business. And first and foremost, there is obviously with universities itself, there is a lack as well. One of the initiatives that came out of Rio +20 was a group of 50 of the leading universities to redefine their curriculum. Because if you look at 70–80% of the people that go to university end up in business, if you like it or not. And if you look at what they have produced and how they think business should be run, there's something suboptimal. I want to be negative about it, but there's something suboptimal. So we're working with a group of universities. In the UK, I'm participating with Durham University. In the north. They have a wonderful management school, and they're all looking at redesigning their curriculum. Now, there are other things that have happened in each individual country. The investments in education has come down, which is terrible. Europe is still ahead, but the investment in education has come down in Europe in the last 10 years. So at the European level, we're trying to make clear that we need to invest. Engineers is not sexy anymore. Yeah? Manufacturing industry was disregarded. And I remember the first discussion with Osborne when he came in, why should we have manufacturing in the UK? Now he's saying, I wish we wouldn't have so much banking and had more manufacturing in the UK. We happen to be a manufacturing industry. I was in Spain and I said, we can help your youth unemployment by growing tomatoes in Spain instead of importing them for our Knorr products and other things. And the answer I get is young people don't want to work anymore on the land and be a farmer. Well, my father was a farmer, I'm proud of it. Farmers still feed the world, you know. So we have to go back a little bit to the real economy. That's why this chart again that Bernard put up is interesting. Not to get sidetracked, but only 5% of all the money that banks circulate around goes to financing businesses and growth. The other 95% was all above his line on the chart. So education is part of that, obviously. We need to be part of that solution. Again, once more, work with universities to reform, convince governments to spend more on education, rebalance our commitments to our workforces, to not pay everything at the end, and, you know. Now, I always favored the system myself of first taking retirement before you work. I always thought the system of having retirement after you work when you get old and more difficult to travel is a rotten system. So I thought always, why don't we create a society where people can first retire and then work until they die? But that doesn't seem to be very practical. But we need to balance it.
Well, some of us are working on that model of things. I'm going to take one more very quick question and a quick answer, and then we'll wrap it up. Sir.
Many big corporates acquire smaller companies to get innovation. And I'm just wondering if you see partnering with social enterprises as a source of innovation that you can bring into your core.
Absolutely. It's a very good question. Absolutely, a very good question. And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. For example, with Jacqueline Novogratz from Acumen Fund, I'm actually with her next week in Pakistan. So we have some projects going on. We have 5 foundations that we work with, the big ones, PSI, Oxfam, Save the Children, World Food Programme, and now I always forget one when I say 5. But anyway, a lot of projects going on with them at the social entrepreneur level, making things come alive. Especially up the supply chain, especially for us with smallhold farmers. For example, we work with an organization, to give you an example, one of our brands is Domestos, and toilets and hygiene. There's still 2.5 billion people not able to get access to safe water and sanitation. Open defecation is a big issue that affects everything, and health and well-being. So we have a commitment in our business to build 500,000 toilets for people. That's one of our goals of this Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. It makes sense for us because we sell more Domestos and we create the market. But how do we, what we find now in Africa especially, how can we create economically viable models around waste, human waste? We work with the WTO, which is not Pascal Lamy's organization, but it's an organization by a guy called Jack Sim, who is the World Toilet Organization. Brilliant acronym. And the World Toilet Organization has some projects in Africa now. And so we're experimenting with these things around many different areas in our business. There are about 50, 60 going on. Distribution models like Shakti that C.K. Prahalad helped us with in India, where you have microfinancing. I was with Mohamed Yunus the other day, and he says, I do more microfinancing than anybody else. I said, frankly, I respect you, but I don't think so. I said, we have just the Shakti ladies is 60,000 in India that are being financed with our products to be our distributors. And when you talk to a Shakti lady, not only do they earn the $30, $40 extra a month, which some people might not say is a lot, but the most important thing is they have gained that dignity. They're people that are now finally respected in their villages. They have a job, they mean something. So that social entrepreneurship model, we're trying to push that all the time because, frankly, the most difficult part that we also find now with the Millennium Development Goals, where you talk about zero hunger, education for all, total poverty elimination. The numbers are staggering, but how do you get to this bottom 2 billion? It's just, and yet, you know, even today, there's 1 billion people going to bed hungry every day, not knowing if they wake up the next day. There's still, every 6 seconds, a child is dying of hunger. And yet, and we're wasting 30% of our food. You know, on the other side, there's over 1 billion obese. Diabetes too is probably one of the biggest epidemics that we're going to get. Why can't we figure out with this normal set of brains, with people like yourself, with your, you know, with your design capabilities. Why don't we design a decent food security system? That's why I agreed to be leading the task force on food security for the B20. But the governments, you know, they promise, they don't deliver. They look at their own countries. At the moment there's a crisis, they have an embargo on export. You know, so how do we galvanize enough people? You know, I'm now totally in a different planet than this panel, to be honest, because I'm trying to think about how can I get 1 billion youths to just demand what needs to be done and be that force for good. Half the world anyway in the emerging markets is below 29. And they're half now, but they're 100% tomorrow. That makes it more interesting to me. And they understand what needs to be done. They understand this whole thing on sustainability. Meanwhile, we're sitting here, do we believe it or not? What is the definition? What do the consumers think? You know, the world has moved on. So how can we galvanize those people, create a force of 1 billion and drive that change? One of the things we did the other day in London when we were having consultations on the Millennium Development Goals, we had one day with the youth. I mean, that was the best day. I just came home like, you know, as if I drank coffee the whole day, so energized about, and these people have solutions, but they're not being listened to. They're not in the Doha rounds. They're not in Rios. We think they don't know anything. You know, Alexander the Great was 20 when he conquered Macedonia, and the greatest, you know, emperor of all time. Jeanne d'Arc was 19 when she did Orléans, and the siege of Orléans for the French army at that time. You know, Zuckerberg is probably 20 when he started it. So give these people that voice, enroll them, and galvanize that change. It's really what we need to do.
Well, thank you so much.